So this is a project-based class where we want you to go out and actually capture content from a shot list that we provide you. I've been fortunate enough to work with brands and magazines to shoot campaigns for them. And typically these are the type of photos they're looking for. Your shot list consists of 4 shots: street portrait, look up, motion blur, night photography. Some things that I try to avoid when I'm out shooting street photography are things that are very touristy, things that are fake. So I try not to shoot big brand stores or locations or streets that have nothing but stores on them where people are carrying shopping bags. I'm looking for places that are very, once again, just authentic to that city. So once you have your 4 shots, I want you guys to log on to Skillshare and upload your class project. And I really want to see these in sets of 4. I want to see it in order, from street portrait to look up to motion blur to night photography. I want you guys to give each other feedback and really showcase to each other what your city is all about, the life of your city. Along with you guys, it's time for me to go capture my project. So this is a street portrait I took in Chicago on LaSalle Avenue. I was working on a Nike project actually. The same way she's walking, I had about 6 runners running across in between lights changing. She was on the end of that walk when my runners had already passed. But I had been standing there for probably a good 30 to 45 minutes. So this is like another classic example of just like holding my ground, becoming part of the location where she wasn't even noticing that I was there. I think my favorite thing about this shot is her stride. I know you can get photos like this all the time, but the way she's walking to me, it's a real hustle. Like she's got somewhere to go, and it just really translates in the photo. I think that the other thing that I love about it is that her head falls right underneath the clock of the Chicago Board of Trade building. I think that's just like a small little detail that I love, along with just the image being completely full. There's no tops of the building, and you really get this vanishing point leading all the way to the Chicago Board of Trade. I shot the street portrait in Istanbul. I was actually shooting the location itself. This is kind of a famous location in Istanbul in a neighborhood called Balat. Just these rows of painted houses. It's kind of famous there. So I was taking photos of that, and I saw this old man walking up, and I just thought it was really intriguing. One, he just looked like somebody from Turkey. Another thing that I really liked about it is that he had this cane, and he had a really slow walk, and he was just walking up this big hill. And you could tell it was going to take him a long time, and that he was taking his time. And I just felt like it was just a classic, beautiful moment. You can tell he walks this hill every day, but it doesn't bother him at all. This was taken in Istanbul as well. I love this shot. I felt like she actually went and got a second bag after I was beginning to take her photo the first time, and I felt like she actually went and got a second bag just so I could grab her photo. But I loved everything about her. I loved the way her shirt went into her hands. I always thought that was interesting when I was taking her photo. But I also loved the way her scarf around her head pops against the black on her body. But the location itself is gorgeous with all those birds, the texture on the floor from the food. It's just a really authentic photo to Istanbul and to Turkey. So this was taken in India in just a small alley. I was walking around taking photos, and it's amazing how open they were to having their photo taken. I felt like they know, just as a culture, how vibrant, authentic, and real their lifestyle is. And they're really comfortable with it. So I think naturally they're just comfortable with photographers walking around and taking their photo. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to look. I've gotten a ton of looks, and even though they're looking pretty stale and mean mugging, they're quite content and just normal looking, just giving me a strong stare to the camera. And I think that is better than a smile. I think it shows that they're still themselves even though I'm taking that photo. They didn't change anything for me. And as a photographer, I can really appreciate that. This might look like a still moment, but there was probably 10 people waiting just to pass by me to get into this little tight area where there's already tons of people. I was definitely blocking the way. But I was blocking the way so no one would get in front of my shot. I was quick. It didn't take me long. But in India, everything is so quick. There's people everywhere. And at this moment, I had to be quick. And another thing that I like about India and about this shot is that I shot this with a 50. I usually always walk around with a 24, whether I'm shooting lookups, portraits, motion shots. I'm usually always rocking with a 24 as my base shot. If I see it in a different way or I know it's going to work in a different way, I'll change lenses. But when I was in India, I stayed with a 50 the entire time. Sometimes I would put a 24 on, but I would immediately change back to a 50. I wasn't able to isolate subjects as well, especially when shooting street portraits. There was so much going on that when I was shooting wide, I wasn't able to get a clear enough depth of field to really isolate someone. So the shots were always coming out extremely busy. But with a 50 and getting really wide open with it, getting really tight, I was able to isolate a lot better. So the next shot we're going to talk about on our shot list is a lookup, which I've been asked by a couple brands to get for them on assignment. It's amazing, like, I never called a lookup a lookup. To me, that was like my shot when I started. That's all I wanted to do, was like shoot lookups. To me, that's like a trash hand shot. I'm constantly looking up, even when I'm not shooting. Walking down the street, driving my car. If I'm downtown or anywhere near some architecture, I'm definitely looking up. And I think the best part about a lookup, too, is that all I really need is an iPhone to get it. I think the iPhone's perfect for lookup shots because it's capturing all this detail without having to worry about your aperture or anything like that. And when you're capturing lookups, you want to capture as much detail as possible. You want your depth of field to be as big as possible because you want to capture all the detail from the sky to the buildings and all the architecture that goes with that. So with an iPhone, it does that automatically. So for lookups, it's perfect. When shooting lookups, I'm looking for mainly three things. I'm worried about the sky, scale, and the detail of the actual building. So this is a shot I took for Chicago Mag that was featured in one of their magazines. It's a beautiful lookup. You can see that I'm using the glass to reflect the architecture to increase the detail. One of the reasons I love this shot is because outside of the glass, on the exterior of the building, there's so much architecture that's happening. There's so much line work. There's this beautiful vanishing point that almost looks like it's forward, but it's actually pointed directly up. And I love that that pattern continues as it's being reflected on the glass. So there's actually like twice as much happening than if that was just brick and no reflection was happening. You get all this extra detail. I think the main challenge for this shot was just getting the line work right. I think another thing was just trying to focus on what was going to be my priority of lining the shot up. If you can see these two middle lines, they're not actually in the very middle of the shot. But if I used that as a middle, I wouldn't have been able to have the vanishing point actually centered. So I made a sacrifice, and I wanted the vanishing point more centered than those two lines leading into it. This shot was taken in San Francisco, downtown. I love this shot. I took this with actually my 14mm super wide, and I had my camera basically leaning on the building. I think I had it pointing up a little bit, but I still wanted my camera as close to the surface as possible. So I actually had the base of it leaning on the building, but just tilted a bit up so I could capture more of the buildings that were behind me and surrounding this one. But if you notice, because I was so close, I was actually able to get a greater reflection. It's one of my favorite lookup shots just because of the cloud formations. I really love the sky. I really love the feeling I get from it. I love that some of the clouds feel so white, but with the edit, if you look in the top left corner, the sky seems as black as night, but the clouds are as bright as day. And I love the buildings that are around it. There's a ton of negative space, but the clouds really fill it in to a point where it doesn't feel empty. It's still a very full shot. And you can see a bit of the clouds reflections in the Sears Tower to the left, also known as Willis Tower, but I don't call it that. It's just an overall beautiful image. But I shot this out of the moonroof of my car. I actually stopped in the middle of traffic. I wasn't there for long. I had to adjust my settings for a quick second, but I just shot this through the moonroof of my vehicle. So now the next shot we're going to be talking about on your shot list is motion blur. And I think when you work with brands that are all about movement, whether it's cars or running, you really have to be able to portray speed, portray movement, and have that be the main element in the shot. There's two ways that I like to utilize blur. One is where I have the moving object appear as they are moving, as a motion, or where I capture that moving object as a still subject, but the environment around it is blurry. Either way, when I'm capturing blur, I do have a slow shutter speed. One is just going to be slower than the other. When I'm trying to capture the environment still and the subject that's moving as a motion, I'm trying to have my camera somewhere that has a base where I can keep it still and leveled. So as the environment stays still, my camera can as well while the subject is moving, capturing that motion. With a slow shutter speed, still keeping a level exposure, I'll be able to capture that movement. Whereas where I'm capturing the object moving as a still in the environment around it as a blur, I'm panning along with the object as it moves with a slow shutter speed, where I can capture that blur as I pan along with the subject. When I capture my subjects as a motion blur, I like to have them a good distance away from me, as I find it easier to capture that blur when they're a bit further away. If they were closer, you have to pan a lot quicker. It becomes a lot more difficult to actually grab that focus and grab that blur, whereas when they're farther, it's a lot easier, and you can have more time to pan with them because they're farther distance away from you. Obviously, a motion blur shot of the car still with the environment around it blurry. You can obviously read that it says Chicago Police on the car. It's definitely readable. One thing that I do like is that the front of the car is actually blurry. The entire vehicle isn't in complete focus, and I don't think that hinders the image at all. I think it still shows how fast this car was actually moving. As long as you can still read what it says, I think you successfully captured the shot. You can't see what it says behind you. It's definitely unreadable on the building behind it. I love that I was able to capture the light, the blue light, and the rush that this cop was feeling. So this is a shot I did for this brand called Dope Boy Magic, based out of Chicago, also known as DBM. In this shot, you have the subject still, but the moving object as a blur. You can see that in the background, the train is obviously moving. Here, I was actually freehand. I was using my leg. To steady my arm to keep my shot as still as possible. I was towards the beginning of the train platform, so this train was passing me by at its quickest pace versus if it was towards the end when it was coming to its stop. I had the model stay as still as possible as he could be. I have actually him holding his jacket in so it doesn't flail around a lot, so it actually stays as clear as possible as the train passes by him. One thing that I really like about this photo is you can actually see the American flag on the right being dragged along with the motion. You can see where I actually began the shot, where the flag is on the left, and see it passing by.